Let's go now. A little life out here. What the hell's going on out here? Hey, what about that now?
Hello everybody, welcome to the UK Packers podcast. As usual, I'm your host at SteveDiddyNFL on Twitter, and of course follow the group at UK Packers, and it's quick snap. Quick snappage for you. Are you doing it? Let me get right up close here. Are you doing it? Hold on, let me have a listen. Shh, for a sec, just keep the... you dirty old devil. We like to do it together. This is a quick one. I think the Packers are going to win this game. Packers, Broncos. I think the Broncos are the giant great pretenders. And I think we're going to read too much into it when we do win. Look, it's air balls. Air balls in low altitude to Christian Watson. Throw it from the 1 yard line is what I say. And can you imagine Danny wheeling punts in this type of altitude? It's over, people. I'm going to delve into more exact analysis, if you will. But I just want to point out that my old ways of reviewing these games is I like to, instead of looking at Packers related stuff, because we know that, right? I like to jump into the opposing team. And I usually listen to like loads of the opposing teams' podcasts if they have loads. Some teams are garbage, so they don't have a lot of podcasts because they wouldn't earn a living. So I jumped into a Broncos podcast. And if you've seen that skit of that guy, he's an Irish fella on Instagram where the minute someone says something silly, he pulls the cord saying not everyone should have a podcast. These lads said, they've Micah Parsons and other players, like Cooper. And that was it. They left it there. And then they said, this game's not a big deal because there shouldn't be any urgency to the game because it isn't a divisional game and there's nothing really to play for. So it's just going to be a run-of-the-mill standard game. At which stage I inserted my phone out the window, through the window, as the window was closed, because what an absolute load of codswallop. So if the Broncos win this week, they secure a playoff berth. They also keep themselves atop the AFC. And then the other thing this podcast said was that the Packers were the top team in the NFC. They ain't, right? But they're certainly angling for it. We're topping our NFC North, of course. We want to keep that momentum up. But this is, for the rest of the season now, this is just jockeying for, A, can you secure your playoff spot first? Second off, by doing that, are you topping your own division with number of wins? The Packers are absolutely in the driving seat with wins against NFC North opponents. And then, of course, you want to rack up as many as you can because you get home field advantage for the playoffs and maybe a first round bye. So, of course, it's all to play for. And even more so because the Packers come into this game as favourites, even though they're the away team. And I think that's accurate. There's a couple of sort of flashy stats that I'm going to throw at you, right, that make it seem like this game will be closer than it is. But I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that apart from the Packers, being heart attack pack, I don't believe this game is going to be as close as some people think it is. I don't know is the answer to whether I think the altitude is going to play a factor in this. But what I will tell you is that they go on like all of the Denver Bronco players were born at high altitude, spent their childhood skipping off to school in a hot air balloon and are completely normal to it. They're not, right? They're obviously going to suffer in a way as well. Yes, it makes sense if they've been practicing and all that kind of stuff, but it's not natural for a human to do it. So if the Packers can bring about certain conditions, and by that I mean absolutely rocket pace, which is what they might need to do against this Broncos defense, well, then you're going to gas either end of the field. So there's a bit of sort of brinksmanship to it. But let's have a look, and this is what I like to do. I like to run down through, because look, I'm acutely aware, right, is that when I say these gaudy stats, you'll go, oh my God, this is a toss-up of a game. I mean, it's 50-50. I don't think it is. I think the Packers are far stronger. For a number of different reasons. And what I like to do is I like to go back and look at the opponents, because what I'm acutely aware of is that, I don't know, maybe 8 years ago, everyone was banging on about how good the Packers run defense was. So the run stopping everybody. No one can run on the Packers. And they could, right? Because the people we're coming up against were second, third, fourth string running backs, because It even got to a silly stage where one of the other running backs had a tummy bug, right? So that's how silly it got. And then once we started coming up against better opposition, legit number one running backs, well, we absolutely got punished. Speaking of, the Broncos are without their number one guy at running back. So they had to have a guy in there, Harvey, who's a rookie. So we're looking to try to contain him as well. Also, Bo Nix. I see an awful lot of over-egging of Bo Nix. You know, he just finds a way to win. You know, this guy's a natural born killer. And you're like, oh, no, they just eke out games at the very end. And I think that's not a way to earn a living. Because if you look at their scores, they're a scoring a bit away from losing an awful lot of these games. And you might sort of go, well, look at the Packers, Steve, and look what... No, I think this is completely different. I think they're riding high, and your luck eventually runs out in the league. I look at Leicester City, who won the Premier League, and that went on until they won it, of course. The famous one for me in the NFL is the Carolina Panthers. Cam Newton was there, and every single week something other freak accident would happen where someone would fumble the ball and somehow someone would land on it and whatever. There was always something weird that went on. And then they ended up getting to the Super Bowl and getting blown out, right? Because I felt that your luck runs out eventually in these situations. So they played Las Vegas. And I see articles from Broncos journalists saying, oh, this is where we're starting to see the cracks in the armour of the defence here. So they won that game 24-17, despite the fact that the Raiders starting quarterback got injured in that game. But they didn't get it, because what's the biggest thing about this Broncos team is that they are blowing the league apart with sacks. So they're right up there on sacks, and people are shocked as well. Oh, they don't get many takeaways though. Yeah, of course, because their quarterback's on his ass, right? So they're getting sacks after him. They'd expect that pressure would translate into takeaways, but it just isn't. They come up against the Washington Commanders before that, beat them 27-26. That's 1 point, and the Washington Commanders are garbage. They come up against the Kansas City Chiefs. They won by 3 points, 22-19, and the Kansas City Chiefs are all but out of the playoff race. Before that, the Las Vegas Raiders 10-7. Won by 3. The Houston Texans won by 3. The Dallas game, they blew them out 44-24, so that was a good showing. But before that, the Giants bet them by 1 point. The New York Jets bet them by 2 points. The Philadelphia Eagles bet them by 4 points. So this isn't a team that is one to be feared, I don't think. And I think their opponents have been quite weak on the run-in. So that's why the Broncos have the best third down defense in the league. But they're coming up against the Packers, who have the best third down offense in the league. And you can see that in a number of different ways, right? Is that the Broncos are the best third down defense because they key off on first and second down, they pushed you into third and long situations, and then they're able to capitalise on it. Now they're coming up against, to me, are poor teams who have been offensively poor this year. Not only that, but the Broncos are best for red zone defense, but the Packers are one of the best red zone offenses. So something has to give. And I think this is a case of when the Packers were the best run-stopping team, and then they come up against a legit team. And I'm going to call it like this. If the Packers can go up against this AFC opponent, and they can pull out a convincing win, and Jordan Love can put up gaudy numbers, which I think he will again, and the Packers win convincingly, you best believe that it's all going to heat up in the media about how the Packers are going to win the Super Bowl. And I don't think that's unjustified. Especially because it's already been recognised with the Packers being favourites on the road here. The other stat that I want to point out as well is that, I mean, how you beat a quarterback is very simple, right? It's hard to do, but it's very simply explained. You get on heavy pressure. The less amount of guys that you can bring that pressure with and cover up in the back end, well then the more you blanket the coverage, they don't know where to go and they run out of ideas, right? And you need a really proficient quarterback who can read defenses when it gets to that stage. And that's what you need to do against this Green Bay Packers team. It's also what you need to do against this Denver Broncos team. But what I will say is that Jordan Love is one of the best, if not the best quarterback in the league in man coverage and also against the blitz. And you have to look behind that and ask yourself why. This means that he has targets who get open, and that's even more apparent now because Christian Watson is firing on all cylinders. And if you look at Jordan Love's passer rating and completion percentage and long balls when Christian Watson's on the field versus when he isn't, it's night and day. So the fact that he's out there, you would expect them to try take away Christian Watson. But the Packers don't really have a de facto number one wide receiver. And with Jaden Reed coming into the mix, I mean, Jesus, even Wiley at tight end is coming down with some passes. Jordan Love does not discriminate against who he throws it to, whoever is open. So what does it tell us then if he's good against man coverage and he's good against blitz coverage, apart from the fact that he has targets from wide receivers who are getting open downfield quickly to allow him to beat that coverage, is that he has the ability to diagnose when there is a blitz. So he can see when the blitz is coming. And when you bring the blitz, you leave your skill positions relatively uncovered, or you're getting into man coverage 1v1s, and he's able to pick out the hot receiver, the free receiver. And he's very good at doing that. So, and it's the same in man coverage. So when you're good against man coverage, which means you either have a receiver or receiving target, be it your running back or tight end, who's able to get separation, or at least enough separation so that you can hit that guy in stride, or find that pocket, that over shoulder throw that only he can get. And that's proficiency at the quarterback level. Jordan Love doesn't get the accolades that he should on the MVP stakes. And that's because he plays quarterback in a very measured, almost boring fashion with his personality. He's a nice dude. He's not a rah-rah guy. Goes out and gets the job done, and is absolutely stellar, in my opinion, of making that odd, boneheaded play, which he did last week, and then able to just come out and just skin you alive as well. So it's a really good sign where Jordan Love is at, that he has these young receivers who get open, and also he's able to actually diagnose a defense, which is really good. You can see it. I mean, there's a couple of times in that last game where he'll have a free rusher right in his face, right up the middle, unblocked, and he makes the perfect throw. Also, he picks it between the numbers. He's savage when it comes to getting the ball in the middle of the field. And that opens up an area of this offense that we haven't had for a long time, because Aaron Rodgers would famously stay away from it because it is a danger zone. That's why Jordan Love gets himself into trouble. That's why he gets picked off, but that's also why he's absolutely dynamite. Add to that, from reading into the Broncos beat writers, it looks like their pass rush is slowing down, so either people are finding out a way to beat it, or some of their dynamite pass rushers are just starting to slow down or be contained. And bearing in mind that they called the Las Vegas Raiders one of the worst offensive lines in the league, yet still they weren't able to properly get home, is a really good sign for this Packers offense, who have by and large kept Jordan Love nice and upright and healthy. And as well as that, Jordan Love has become very good at sort of throwing off his back foot and leaking off into sort of different angles and throwing across his body, stuff that you really shouldn't do and that would get you in trouble. He ends up doing. Also, they're rotating their cornerbacks around for the Broncos, and they're allowing more busted coverage as a result. And look, the blessing for the Packers is, as I said, Jordan Love doesn't just zero in on one guy. So yes, they can have their star cornerback on Christian Watson, but that just leaves these other guys open. I personally believe, and I thought that the Bears would be a game that we would win. I did not expect it to come down and be tight. I expect the Packers to surprise the NFL and to surprise the Broncos. And the Broncos are a good sort of coach team, with Sean Payton in there, and he was a bit of a laughingstock last year, and it seemed to be that he threw our beloved Nathaniel Hackett, under the bus and blamed him on everything and bad habits and all this type of stuff. They've really corrected the ship, but when you look behind it, it's an awful lot of very close wins. You can look at that two ways. Some people look at it and go, they just find a way to win. They're always measured. They're never out. I see that stuff as skinny your arse, a bit gimmicky. I would rather see evidence that you could put teams away convincingly. But the Broncos are like the Bears. They sort of are trailing in most games and then just stay in it and come back to win. And I'm not convinced about Bo Nix either. There's an awful lot of song and dance about how great Bo Nix is. I think that if Micah Parsons does what he does, then he's going to make them very one-dimensional. Because the thing is you look at Micah Parsons' stats, and if you look at him and he doesn't have his sacks, he doesn't have a lot of pressures, it means he's being held. That's the trade-off. The amount of times he's being held, and Matt LaFleur came out and spoke openly about it, is just insane. And I think that there has to be something done in the league about it. Micah Parsons never complains. I never see him shouting at the ref, and he only brings it up when he's asked. That's a true professional, doesn't use anything else to sort of lay blame on production or anything like that, but it's plain as day. He got half his jersey ripped off against the Bears because we're holding him so much. So there has to come a stage where the referees have to zero in on it, because otherwise it's absolutely scandalous. But anyway, I think this is a Packers win for all the reasons I mentioned. I think the Broncos get sort of laid bare a little bit, and this gives them a bit of a shocker. And I think the Packers then can march on, because we have, games coming up against divisional opponents, and it just sort of further would solidify our stance that this team is going to go the distance. And I hope that they do, of course. Anyway, I'm Matt Steely, the NFL. You're the best bloody audience ever. Let's watch this game. And unfortunately as well, some of these games have been flexed, so they're kind of late. So I did have somebody ask me, are we doing any meetups for the rest of the season? Potentially for playoffs. If we do get to the playoffs, and when we get to the playoffs, especially if it's in Lambeau Field, we'll be doing a trip to the postseason, which would be absolutely sensational. That I'll be leading over as well. So stay tuned for that. So let's cheer on the Pack, everybody. But anyway, I'll be back to break down the game straight after. It's a Go Pack Go.